Ancient historians such as Appian, Democritus, and Posidonius described instances of Jewish ritual murder. In 168 before Christ, Appian reported an intended victim, an adult, not a child, was found at the Jewish temple. Jewish historian Flavius Josephus disagreed with Appian's findings, which were translated and published by Thackeray in his book Josephus. Thackeray reported, Antiochus found in the temple a couch on which a man was reclining. The king's entry was instantly hailed by this man with adoration. Falling to his knees, he stretched out his right hand and implored the king to set him free. Thereupon the king reassured him and bade him tell him who he was, why he was living there, and what was the meaning of this abundant fare. In a pitiful tone and full of sighs and tears, the man told this tale of his distress. He said he was a Greek, and that while travelling about his province for his livelihood, he was suddenly kidnapped by men of a foreign race and conveyed to the temple where he was locked up. Finally, the attendants who were waiting upon him told him of the one unutterable law of the Jews, a ritual which was repeated annually at a fixed time. They would kidnap a Greek foreigner and then convey him to the forest, where they would slay him, sacrificing his body with their customary ritual, eat of his flesh, and while immolating the Greek, swear an oath of hostility against the Greeks. The remains of their victims were thrown into a pit. In the first millennium of the current era, in the year 300, Bishop Eusebius of Caesarea said that Jews in all communities ritually murdered Christians during their Purim festivals. In the year 415, Socrates Scholasticus reported that Jews of Emistar bound a Gentile child on a cross and poked him till he died. In 425, Baronius reported Jews had crucified a child. In 614, the monk Antiochus Strategos reports that when Jerusalem fell to the Persians, Jews purchased one of the Gentiles who had been captured by the Persians and slew him like a sheep. In 1067, Prague, 6 Jews reportedly drained blood from a 3-year-old child. It was also discovered that these Jews had dispersed the child's blood, giving it to other Jews in Treviso. In 1096, a child by the name of Estrati was reportedly discovered having been ritually murdered in what is now known as the city of Kiev. He was later made a saint. In the year 1115, near the city of Magdeburg, Germany, on the day prior to Passover, Hasidic Jews tortured 5 children and used their blood in occult rites. The incident was investigated, and the Jews were found guilty and punished accordingly. Up until that time, many of the previous incidents had probably been forgotten. It seems likely that most historical records regarding these incidents were lost over time. In the year 1144, an incident occurred to a child in England that would make history and the Jews not easily forgotten. It had been just a little over 50 years since Jews were first permitted to enter England in 1089. A small number of them had just been brought to England in an effort to assist the king with collecting his taxes. Consequently, as the town discovered to their dismay, a child by the name of William was ritually murdered. But what made this event different was that this child was related to an educated monk, Thomas of Monmouth.
In 1144, a Catholic monk, Thomas of Monmouth, wrote a extensive book about the murder of little William of Norwich, a young boy who was murdered by the Jewish ritual murder cult. He was created a saint of the Catholic Church, the first of many of a series of saints. Depending on how one counts them, there are at least 20 to 25 of them in the history that are recognized as Christian martyrs by the Catholic Church.
This event that occurred to William, like so many before it, could have eventually sunk into obscurity. But Thomas wanted to let the whole world know about this cruel and vicious nature of these wicked acts once and for all, probably with the hope of putting a stop to them. His book was written in Latin and was later translated into English in the 19th century by Dr. A. Jessup. Thomas of Monmouth described how Jews abducted the child. Afterwards, according to Thomas, this occurred. Having shaved William's head, he wrote, they stabbed it with countless thorn points and made the blood come horribly from the wounds they made. And cruel were they, and so eager to inflict pain that it was difficult to say whether they were crueler or more ingenious in their tortures. Thomas of Monmouth described the whole sordid event in detail, the abduction, the torture suffered by the child, and the bribes Jews gave to the sheriff, and more. Thomas's efforts to document this Jewish occult rite of an innocent child eventually resulted in the child becoming a saint, and he was remembered until modern times, until the Church no longer permitted such politically incorrect facts to be known. Thomas did a great service to the world in his efforts to eradicate child sacrifices by making known what had occurred on that dark, grisly day back in 1144. It put parents in England on alert, so they would know to take precautions to keep their children safe. Unfortunately, that was not the last such reported incident of Jewish ritual murder. Why would Jews continue to engage in such wicked crimes? Dr. Arnold Lees, who wrote a book about Jewish ritual murder in the early part of the 20th century in England, noted some interesting facts surrounding the ritual murders. A converted Jew called Theobald of Cambridge confessed that the Jews took blood once a year from a Christian child because they thought that only by so doing could they ever obtain their freedom and return to Palestine. And it was their custom to draw lots to decide whence the blood was to be supplied. The tragic murder that occurred to innocent William set a precedent. Because of Thomas of Monmouth's books that he wrote about the good child, others began to record these wicked deeds perpetrated by fanatical Jews. Some more of these reported victims follow. In 1243, in Kissingen, Bavaria, Jews were convicted by a court of law after having confessed to having used the blood of Gentiles for occult rites in their Jewish holiday of Passover. In the year 1255 in London, England, a young innocent Gentile by the name of Hugh was discovered to have been ritually murdered. His punctured body was found hidden on a Jew's property. After having reviewed the evidence, a court tried and convicted 18 prominent Jews of having committed the deed. The child was later canonized and became a saint. Altogether, before the Catholic Church became a bulwark for political correctness, there were over 20 children who had been ritually murdered by Jews and made into saints. In 1290 in Oxford, England, a Jew by the name of Isaac de Poulet was arrested for the ritual murder of a Gentile child. Perhaps this was the defining moment, as Jews were permanently banished from England a month later. Many of these Jews fled to Germany or other European cities. It was only after the King of England himself was murdered 4 centuries later by Lord Cromwell that Jews were allowed back there, although the edict officially remains in effect. In 1331 in Gubelin, Germany, it was said the Jews